One beverage. As you can see, we're recording the session, so now you're on screen for all eternity to see. I'd like to welcome you very warmly to the first webinar today of the BuiltHub project on the topic of building a sustainable and meaningful data flow of the EU building stock. We have about 2 hours for the session today, and we have a wonderful panel of panelists that we will hear from extensively, and that we will have also an interactive session today so that all of you can ask and answer questions and hopefully have a lively discussion. I think a bit of housekeeping is in order. Laura, if you want to go to that slide where it has a couple of the practical piece of information. Thank you very much. So we will mute you as participants at the moment, just to prevent any background noise at the moment. You are very warmly invited to keep your cameras on as much as we can. We like to see each other and have a bit of a personal feel during these undoubtedly difficult times, to have compensation for physical interactions, obviously. And then if you have any kind of questions, you're very welcome to basically interrupt the session flow if you like, and put them in the chat. We will then pick them up in a meaningful way. With that said, I would like to just briefly introduce what the agenda for today, what we're going to do today, and then I'll introduce you to my panelists. So we'll have a quick introduction into the project, and we'll have a panel discussion for about 60 minutes with an open Q&A session for you as the audience for about 30 minutes, although I would recommend to not keep it very separate at that part. Please feel free to also, as I said, post your questions in the chat. We'll try and pick them up as they become relevant. And then we have a quick wrap up. So it's a fairly straightforward agenda. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists and myself. My name is Roman Mendle. I'm a coordinator for sustainable resources, climate and resilience at ICLEI Europe, and I'll be your moderator for today. And with me on the panel, we welcome Ulrich Filippi Oberegger. He's a senior researcher at the Institute for Renewable Energy at EURAC in Bolzano. He holds a PhD in engineering science and leads the team on smart buildings at EURAC. He has 10 years of work experience, where he has worked as a scientific and technical coordinator and contributor in many EU projects. And he's also the coordinator of the BuiltHub project for today, and will give the introduction in a minute about the topic that we're talking about today. Also with us today is Roel Vermeiren. He is a renovation strategy advisor at the Flemish Energy Agency. He has a master's in clinical psychology and in public management, and works with the Flemish Energy Agency on rational energy use, social energy policy, and he coordinates the Flemish long-term Renovation Strategy 2050 for residential buildings. Then joining us as well is Maria Söderlind. She is an open data lead at Umeå Kommun in Sweden, where she leads the Smart Open Data Decision Platform. She is a former IT consultant and project manager, and has worked extensively in both public and private organizations, executing a lot of IT and digitalization related projects for Swedish SMEs and organizations. And with the Smart Open Data Decision Platform, she is going to tell us about how Umeå aims to provide a way to understand the impact of smart city interventions through real-time visualization, static data, and combined data sets. Then we have with us Daniela Wagner. She is a project advisor for Life Energy at CENEA. Daniela holds a master's degree in eco energy engineering. She's experienced in energy efficiency as a consultant and project manager, and has worked on several EU projects. And her current work is focused on energy efficiency finance in the building sector. And last but not least, we have Andrew Knight with us. He's International Data Standards Director at RICS, a global professional body for valuation, land, property, construction, and infrastructure. He currently leads the development and the adoption of RIC's new suite of data standards that support data exchange between service providers technology companies and end users of data in the built environment and valuation sectors. He also has experience in working with finance and investment community, working with debt and equity participants, their advisors in law and accountancy, and regulators. So very warm welcome to our panelists here. I hope you can hear the virtual claps in the background. And without further ado, I would hand over to Ulrich to take us through a couple of slides about the project and the topic that we want to discuss here today.
Yeah, thank you, Roman, for this nice introduction, and hello to everybody, and good morning also from my side. I'm going to share my screen and give you an introduction to the Horizon 2020 BuiltHub project I'm coordinating. Can you hear me clearly? And can you see my presentation? Okay. So let's start. So I'm going to introduce you the project BuiltHub, which is about building a sustainable and meaningful data flow of the European building stock. Maybe I just get my clock running so that I know the timing and I can have a look. Okay, so today I would like to speak about the BuiltHub's objectives and achievements so far. And then the second half of my presentation will be about challenges and open questions, which will then open the floor to the panel discussion. I'm looking very much forward to your questions and to your experiences. Starting with the project's objectives and what we could achieve so far. In a nutshell, BuiltHub is a coordination and support action. We are now in the second year of a 4-year project, and the main goal is to develop a roadmap for sustained data flow to the European Building Stock Observatory. The BSO is a web-based platform where stakeholders can find information about the building stock of each member state in the European Union, and also visualizations of this data at yearly levels, so one can see the transition of the building stock throughout the years. We would like to give suggestions on how to ever improve this platform. And then we are also going to build and engage a community for data collection, for data exchange, and data to knowledge processes and services. We are working on standardizing data governance offered, and we are demonstrating this through a web-based platform we create in the project. And we use this platform also to test any approach we are going to develop and to get feedback from stakeholders, such that we can feed this information into our roadmap, and such that the roadmap is actually showing what stakeholders want and endorses best practices. And finally, we are coordinating actions among associated projects and initiatives. We already built a nice community of stakeholders which are on board, and of course we are extending this list throughout the project. You can see on this slide that there is a fairly good geographical distribution. We also have some non-EU members, and we have an interesting distribution also by organization type. You can see that academia is most present, but we also have a nice distribution of energy agencies, policymakers, designers, financial institutions, public bodies, etc. in the list. And of course, we are always looking forward to broaden this list and to reach really any kind of organization type relevant for working with European building stock data. From the survey results we carried out so far, it becomes very, very clear that stakeholders want access to more data, that they want comparable data, they want to compare their data to data for other countries, cities, or municipalities, depending on the granularity of the data. And they have a high interest to access to benchmarks, scenarios, plans, and goals. So that's a service which would be very interesting for them to be provided to them. They also gave high importance to data collection, storage, analysis, processing, community building, to be able to complement data from different sectors, to do a cross-sector analysis, etc. So what they also highlighted is they are very interested in a privileged access to a live sharing data community. So of course, if you can have exclusive or direct access to data, that can be very valuable for their business. We are developing, as I said before, a web-based platform where we test the data we have and also the services especially. And we then will do a lot of stakeholder interactions in several feedback loops to get their opinion on the services, what they would like to have. And we in this project, we don't aim so much for completeness. So the goal is not so much to provide a complete data platform ourselves, but to have representative services and to then be able to feed this information into the roadmap to then be able to improve at European level the building stock observatory. So you can see that we, of course, will allow stakeholders to filter the data by country, year, and then other dimensions, and offer user stories and journeys depending on their needs. We have collected a series of representative data sets and data sources. So what we are also doing is mapping these data sources and most important data providers in Europe. And we have here a list of 30 and more data sets from EU projects and national statistics websites, etc. And we have 3 kinds of data, so building stock related data sets, socioeconomic and climatic data sets mainly. We do quite some amount of networking and outreach, of course, since this is a coordination and support action. So we collaborate for the next generation, building data collection and sharing through surveys, interviews, separate calls with stakeholders, webinars like this one, workshops, dialogues, and strategic panels. We work with the main European institutions such as Eurostat, JRC, and also the concerted action for the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. We work with other big data projects of the Horizon 2020 framework. In this case, especially with the big data projects beyond Big and Matrix, but also with many other Horizon 2020 projects where I'm coordinating with the coordinators and the consortia. And we work and try to reach out and then get involved with other initiatives, associations, and institutions for exchanging data. Here I wanted to show you a snapshot, so a bird view, so to speak, of the roadmap we are developing. And we look at different dimensions, as you can see, from political to environmental. And we would like to give in this very brief summary the main points that we think and that emerge from the stakeholder feedback would be interesting to push forward optimally in the next 3 years. And as this slide suggests, these dimensions can move forward in parallel to some extent, but they are also kind of in sequence. So some measures might need to come earlier and to prepare the terrain, so to speak, for other measures coming later on. And you can see there is a wide range. So of course, the political framework supports a sustainable data flow through both financial instruments and technical infrastructure. For example, you need to have sound business cases. The social aspect must be cared about. So from education and training to involving the public, the technological aspect, that's, I think, quite clear. The legal aspect is very important. So to make sure that data stays private and where needed, and that intellectual property is protected, that you have a good licensing framework. And of course, the environmental agenda goals should be fulfilled. We already produced some resources, so we have a brochure and a video you can look at, and it's easy to get involved with us. You can become proactive by just contacting us, and in various ways you can participate to our project or simply follow us. Now I would like to come to the challenges and open questions. So the first question I typically discuss, and we also typically get, is why even care to share data? So why not just keep data to yourself? Because data is oftentimes a business critical asset and very hard to get and to clean up and to process, to analyze. And therefore, there must be a clear reason for sharing data and not just trying to get value out of having the exclusive property on the data. Then another question is how to encourage data sharing. How can stakeholders be more able and more willing to share data? How to exploit available data if it is collected? How to make data fairer, which means making data more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Another important aspect is data quality and reliability, so that data can be trusted. Otherwise, it doesn't have much use. What standards to follow is a question brought up oftentimes by stakeholders. How to bridge the micro and macro data gap, which means how do I go from very detailed data at single initiative level and at single building level to highly aggregated data like the overview of the European building stock for a member state. Then another important aspect is the establishment of a construction buildings data space, which is an important goal of the European Union. How to ensure that data protection regulation, intellectual property protection, security, etc. is ensured. Legal requirements, as I mentioned before, so the right contractual agreements to share data without having to worry that that there are breaches or violations in the agreement. And finally, technical issues, as first of all, digitalization of data, and then automation and ensuring interoperability between platforms. I'm now going a bit more into detail on some of these questions. And so the first one, why share data? It is clear that stakeholders highly request more data. So that became very clear from the beginning. However, they also report that there is a lack of knowledge on the benefits they might have by sharing data, the risk associated with sharing, the efforts and the costs. So oftentimes they say, if I share data, then how do I know that this data is not just capitalized on by others and I miss out the capitalization and exploitation myself? What is the risk if the data is not properly used, and so on. So a quantitative, credible and reliable demonstration might be very important to do. That's our, first conclusion from this feedback. And there also seems to be a lack of readily available resources that support and demonstrate data sharing. And this can go from guidelines to platforms, tools, or for example, templates for data provision agreements. Another question then is, once you are convinced that sharing is good, how to encourage data collection and sharing, so how to make it possible. And by demonstrating the added value, people might put more effort into data collection and sharing. They need to know what is the cost and what benefits can I get out from such sharing. a demonstration of the risks, how to mitigate these risks and how to manage them is, in our opinion, and according to stakeholders' feedback, very useful. Public entities need legitimacy to collect and share data. They cannot just do it because they want to. They need an endorsement or a mandate or a legitimacy at least to do so, resources and a clear view of the advantages. And private entities as well need the resources as well as sound business models. So it's clear that there must be a kind of win-win situation for the involved parties. And as enablers, we identified quite a wide range, and of course, we're always taking up suggestions. So from kind of more rigid enablers as mandates, directives, regulations, to more soft enablers, such as guidelines, training, and dissemination, communication, and awareness rising. Then how to exploit available data. So oftentimes the question arises where I have collected data, but it's not clear what should I do with it. How can I exploit the data the best way? The more data you have, the more difficult it becomes to do reasonable analysis, as this is a very high effort to plan and execute an excellent data value chain. So from the data collection and analysis to providing services and generating an impact in the real world. So what is shown at the bottom of this slide. And what can help is, again, to establish guidelines and learn from best practices. If you see how it can work and what good results you can get, that can be very convincing. Here, I wanted to spend some words on data quality as well. So it starts from automated pre and post processing, so cleaning up the data and transforming the data in such a way that you don't lose information, but you also don't have information in the data set which is confusing or confounding. And this needs to go probably towards a certain amount of automation with some probably manual inspection as well to be cost effective. Then complete standardized metadata, so that is very clear. This is very important. It is very clear what the data represent. This also is reflected by the next item, the comparability of indicators. So I made this very simple example here of square meters, where there are lots of different definitions, and depending on that, the data might not be comparable. And the same for energy and many other important indicators. So a complete transparent description of collection methods, measurement calculation methods in combination with the metadata is important. This combined with manual data inspection and quality assessment services. And we also think, and I mean, it comes out from the stakeholder feedback, that the open community discussing data quality and reliability, so creating such an open community can be very helpful. Another question is what standards to follow. So we got the feedback that sometimes you don't know what standard will be the most prominent in the future. So a company maybe wants to share data, wants to follow a standard, but doesn't know exactly what standard to follow. And important is, of course, that this standard then is established on the market. And then if a company decides to follow a standard, that this was the right choice and that they can be strong on the market. And finally, I wanted to spend a few words on how to bridge micro and macro data gap. So what this means is that in many cases, very detailed monitoring data, for example, is collected or data on single individual buildings. And there is a lot of information out there of single buildings, but it's not clear how to bring all this data together to have an aggregated view. So an idea is shown on the bottom of this slide here, where you could take, for example, all the energy performance certificates or digital building logbooks or building renovation passports, cluster in an appropriate way, aggregate, which is, I mean, a challenge to do, and then you can compare individual buildings, energy performance, and other indicators against benchmarks. So that's one of the ideas we are pursuing. And with this, I want to close this presentation, and I'm here presenting the consortium, and I would like to thank all the partners in the project for their work, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion and your questions, and I will be very glad to answer them and to discuss, and also to take up any suggestion and feedback you may have. So thank you.
Excellent, Ulrich. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive overview of the topic. I think there were a lot of questions and also ideas to unpack today. I hope the remaining time of 1.5 hours that we have is actually enough for this topic. It probably won't be. But before we move into the further discussion, I just wanted to flag that there's a couple of there's an audience question that we have in the chat that Emily posted. And with that, I would also like to invite everyone who is listening in on the webinar today, while we speak now with the panelists and so on, again, to post your questions, and maybe also as a first order of business to introduce yourselves, if you don't mind, in the chat with your name and affiliation, so that we also get an idea of who we're speaking to. That would be quite helpful, and we're very happy to pull you into the discussion as we move along. With that said, maybe we can move to Roel. Because when we had the introduction right now from Ulrich, there was basically a lot of ideas around why we need data, what people are expecting, what we need, and so on, but also a lot of the barriers. Before we dive deeper into those, I would like to ask you, since you're working on the implementation of the Renovation Strategy 2050 for the Flemish region, I'm wondering from a practical perspective, why are we doing all of this? You know, you as a practitioner that has a very concrete task at hand in the building sector, that is renovation, what role does data play within that? And you know, the messages that Ulrich was sending with what we're working on the BuiltHub project, how can this help with the actual renovation strategy and its implementation?
Thank you, Roman. I'll try to give you an answer to this question. Based on the preparation of the long-term renovation strategy for the Flemish region in Belgium, which was prepared in 2019-2020 in according to the EPBD directive. So then we noticed that we do not only need a view on the building stock characteristics, but also we're in need for some modeling, because when you have a long-term goal for the renovation of your building stock, an energy performance goal, then there are several ways of reaching this goal. And therefore, we developed together with an external consultant a model based on available data on the building stock and the energy performance, but also on the potential of secondary benefits. And in that period, we experienced that the data quality is not always that good, or for several parameters, there's a lack of data. Or the data is not complete, so you have to move along with on the basis of assumptions. But it was very, very interesting to do, because beforehand we didn't have a model, and then we put together this model. It's a very basic tool that was developed. We didn't have that much of a budget neither, so it was like a first experience, a first development of a tool. And it's very interesting that even if the data is not ideal in a certain situation at a certain point of time, you can come up with an interesting model offering you the possibility of modeling various scenarios to reach the long-term renovation goal. And in our case, that was very useful to convince also the political level to choose for a very, very ambitious renovation strategy and to translate this strategy into measures that will not only start in 10 or 15 years, but measures, forceful measures that can start right now. So basically that was very interesting. And based on this estimation that we need a lot of additional data, especially for the non-residential buildings, we already started up a cooperation with a specialized data analysis company in Belgium. And they are working now on a model as well for the modeling of the renovation strategy for the non-residential sector. And there we see that in this phase, we're already able to have a more professional approach using real, how can I say, we have a bigger budget. So the model that is in preparation right now will be far more professional and linked to all the existing database. So it's a continuous evolution towards better data use. And on the other hand, a very important database for our renovation strategy was the EPC database, the energy performance database. Because that's basically our overall indicator for the evolution of the energy performance of the residential building stock. And what we did as well is we came up with a building passport, the Woning Pass, that was launched already in 2019. And there we use all kinds of underlying data for the individual building owner. So it's not only, we don't only use these data for the high level strategy, but also for the for reaching out towards the individual building owner. And there in this interface, we use several underlying databases. And in a very user-friendly way, we present all this data on a certain building. But it's a long, it's a difficult job. It's time consuming, it's money consuming. You need a lot of specialists. There are like was said in the presentation, there are various obstacles on the privacy issues, etc. But it's very, very interesting to have more data, and also the benchmarking potential is also very interesting. If we can compare amongst the European countries, in my experience, the political level is very sensitive for this benchmarking approach, and it could help all the countries to fill in their renovation strategies in a more ambitious way.
Excellent, thank you. This is a very interesting insight in the work that you do, and it sounds to me, at least, that the model that you've developed and the journey that you're on with its many phases and steps is potentially, as a first impact, something that at least it helps you with the decision making on the policy making level and the ways that you're dealing with it. But how about the other stakeholders and your experiences with that? Let's say private building owners, let's say industry within the region and so on. Is there an emerging let's say feedback or interaction in terms of how they as part of the larger ecosystem of the renovation strategy that you have, how they are benefiting from this, and how easy is it for you to work with them?
Yeah, like for instance, the professional building contractor side, or the industry, of course they are interested in the renovation potential. So if you have figures on the renovation needs for them, it's very interesting to know this potential, and also to train the building contractors, because if you know that there's, for instance, for insulation of walls, there's a potential for 30 years, then it's very interesting to share this data with the industry, because they know that in the long run they will there will be a need of their products. So that's in an economical way very interesting. It's also interesting to see that there are contacts with the industry to update their products, like for instance certain types of windows that can be made even more energy performant. So that's basically there's a mutual interest on that part. Also for sharing the data, for instance, on heating installations, we used the sales figures of heating installations in our overall indicator for the evolution of the renovation strategy. So we had a set of indicators, and one of these indicators was the sales figures of different types of heating installations. Let's say the more traditional ones on oil or gas, but also the heating pumps. And then if you do this every year, you can have an interesting evolution, and that can be shared again with the industry and the building sector, giving them some insights in the potential and the evolutions in the market.
Excellent. Thank you for these practical insights. I think it's very important to connect both the work that you do also with what this has an impact outside of our data space that we're more familiar with potentially. With that, I would like to move to Maria. Maria, you're working in Umeå, a commune, on a open data platform, basically. And I'm imagining that some of the things that Ulrich was saying, for example, that there is a demand for more data, for more comparable data, also for more services than built on top of that. And what we heard from Roel right now is something that you very much are in touch with, let's say, in your work as well. Can you tell us a bit more about the platform and what you're trying to build there, and maybe also how where the data comes from and what that work means for you?
Okay, so the platform is our long-term goal is to view this as a decision support platform, also for the decision makers within the municipality, but also for the citizens to use this platform, because you can combine data sets. So maybe if you know someone had made a decision on a data, you can in the future look at that data and counter with, but you didn't look at this fact. What Ulrich said about standards is super important, because that's one of the problems, I think, that we want stakeholders, not only from Umeå, but from Sweden and the entire world, to share the same kind of data in the same way, so that you really can compare it. And for that, we need standards, so we know that we are speaking the same kind of language for this.
Excellent. I think we'll get into standards in a bit. I'm sure Andrew also has a lot of things to say about standardization later on. But while we're on the topic of stakeholders, I know that you told me that the work that you do very heavily relies on stakeholder submissions of data. So how does that work? How do you work with stakeholders, given, we heard from Ulrich already that there's various disincentives actually to share data, and how do you turn this into something positive for people to work with?
That really is the main challenge. The technical challenge aren't the heavy one. The difficult one is to make stakeholders want to share data, because we don't have a KPI on sharing open data. So they feel, why should we do this? It's a bit of what's in it for me. So what has been the trick for us has really been to introduce dashboards. And we show them that if they share data connected to their own KPIs, and then create a dashboard that use the open data, feed the dashboard, and then they can use this dashboard for reporting how they are doing. And then it's a win-win, because both will they have their reporting dashboard always updated, always there, ready to be shown, but also they need to care about the data. The data has to be updated, it has to be good quality, because otherwise their report is really lacking. So that has been the real trick, to show them that they can use the data themselves. They not just giving it away. It can be used for dashboard reporting on the KPIs. Also, if you have a goal that demands citizens' involvement, like let's create a dashboard to show them how we're doing. For instance, we have a dashboard regarding food waste in the schools, and the staff can do much more. So now it's up to the people that really throw away these things, and then they can look at the dashboard and see, are we meeting the goals or are we not meeting the goals?
Excellent, thank you. I see there's also a parallel discussion happening already in the chat with some questions to Roel. Before I'll give you a chance, Roel, to maybe answer some of those questions here for the audience in words. Maria, is there, do you also see that there is a need for introducing people in general to working with data more? So basically the capacity question of the stakeholders that you're working with, is it easy for them to look at the dashboard and understand the values of it, or is there some background work that you need to do within Umeå Kommun to really have people understand what this is that you're trying to build?
I think the dashboard is really, I can see sometimes in the beginning when I had meetings with stakeholders and tried to make them understand the value of sharing open data, I could see they really, okay, we hear you, but I can see what you should do. But then when the minute I show them the dashboard, it's so much more easy to understand. I think also for us, it's been a selling point that we have a portal with visualizations. It's not just the data to download. You can really look at the data in a table form, but you can do analysis yourself on the portal. If there are geographical data connected here, there's a map also, like the energy company shares energy consumption in geographic areas. Then you can both look at a table and really see the numbers. You can look at a chart showing over time how does the energy consumption differ, and then you can see on a map, this is the actual geographic area that we're talking about at this point.
Great, thank you so much for that. I really think it's great to have these practical insights also from the local level, I would say, that you're representing here, and this is very important for us. I'll quickly hand the word back to Roel. I think there was one more question from Eva Bardellini. Sorry if I mispronounced the name slightly now, on what are, in your opinion, the measures that have ensured a high level EPC coverage and quality of data in the residential sector in Flanders. Very specific question, wondering if you have a question, an answer for Eva here.
Yes, so in the Flemish region, we have an EPC obligation for sales and rent of residential buildings, and to guarantee the quality, we have some assessment of this quality, and if there is a lack of quality, then the individual experts that are making up these EPCs can be fined. So there is a sanctioning system. And we needed that in the past because a couple of years ago we noticed that a lot of EPCs were not meeting the quality standards. So, and that was very well known also through the media, and that's one of the possibilities to get a higher quality of this EPC tool or instrument in general. On the other hand, there's also a periodic training for these experts, and that's also helpful to have a high quality EPC database. So that's basically it. So for the moment, we have 1.5 million EPCs for almost 3 million residential buildings. So yeah, it's growing. Another interesting thing maybe is that we also have as part of the renovation strategy some interesting grants that that convince people to go for a deep renovation, and therefore they can have this very interesting grant if they renovate their building towards labels C, B, or A, so a reasonably deep renovation, and therefore they have to prove this renovation with an energy performance certificate. So that's another way of stimulating the use of EPCs.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that question. We actually had one more for you. I know you answered it in the chat already, but maybe just in summary from your side. Alexander was asking if you can mention an example of building data for which the protection of personal data limits the use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Like for instance, in our building passport, when we launched this at the beginning, 2019, 2020, the building passport was only open to the building owner. So it was very restricted, the use of this data. But we would like to have this building passport as a very useful tool in the customer journey in the renovation of the building, and therefore it's very useful to share this data with, for example, an architect or an advisor, or at the moment when a building gets on the market with candidate buyers, and therefore we introduced the possibility to open up the building passports to third parties, and it's the building owner that can give this access to all this material in the building passport to third parties that he or she chooses himself. So that's an interesting one. So that's it's basically a way of have a controlled use of data, personal data, by third parties.
Excellent, thank you. Very important hurdle, I believe. I also recall that we had some discussions around how to handle this within the BuiltHub project to some extent, so certainly something that's interesting for all of us. There's also a question to you, Maria, as a follow-up to what you were saying from Marcelo. He's asking if you monitor who's using the data provided in the platform and what for what purpose.
Okay, so this is an open data platform. We can monitor traffic, and I can see that some data sets have a lot of traffic on it, other ones not so much. But we don't know exactly who is using it or for what purpose. There is a way to give us feedback. What have you done with the data? And we encourage people to do that, but so far we haven't had any feedback. We have seen sometimes that the local newspaper has been using some data that's by pure chance. I saw the article online, and we can see that the energy consumption data is used very much by someone or somebody in America and other areas in the world also, but no, we don't know. It is open data, so they don't have to register in any way to get access to the data.
Excellent. So I think that was a very good insight into, I would say, the local and regional dimension of working with data in the building sector. I would now like to move to Daniela Wagner and basically bring it back to the European perspective. I mean, one of the reasons why we are here today through the BuiltHub project is, of course, that we have a pan-European task that was very much outlined by Ulrich today in terms of bringing data together on this very big scale. So my question to you would be, in what way, where do you see this happen? So basically, if we are successful with the vision that is also created or followed by BuiltHub and similar projects, what would ideally be the world that we live in, where we have these these big data initiatives successfully working on the European level? Where do you go for that to access data, and what is it that are basically the roadmap steps that we're working on? So I'm obviously also asking about the building a sub-observatory and the data flow roadmap that is being developed on the EU level and how these relate to one another.
Very many questions in one. Thank you very much, Roman. So first of all, as I'm working for CINEA, which is working on the different or managing the different funding programs of the European Commission, I would like to present the European perspective first. So I mean, data is crucial, and digitalization and ICT solutions are crucial in order to achieve the Green Deal objectives of the decarbonization of the economy and also our building stock. In that sense, it is absolutely necessary to get access and collect the data from a building level top up to a national level in order to be able to assess the achievements and the process of the objectives achievement. Therefore, there is also the Building Stock Observatory, which is already online since 2000 or under preparation since 2016, as you mentioned, which is collecting performance data of the European building stock from different data sources. As you might have seen, there was the revision proposal for the EPBD published in December 2021, now in December, by the European Commission, which proposes to give this European Building Stock Observatory a stronger role also in terms of integrating data from the national repositories of the energy performance certificates, of the energy of the building passports, and also in the future of strengthened smart readiness indicator, the SRI indicator. In that sense, there will be, or at least it is suggested by the Commission, that there will be a stronger focus on the data from the member states, from the bottom level, feeding into this Building Stock Observatory. When we come to the relationship to the BuiltHub database or the BuiltHub project and roadmap, I think there are three main aspects we have to consider. The one is the interoperability, meaning that open data formats are used, that open protocols are used, which provide access to different sources and different types of data. The second one is taking into account the stakeholder needs and perspectives. So really focusing on who are the data subjects, but also the data users, what are their needs and fears. And I would like to bring the information from another project which we managed on the data availability and willingness to share the data. So there was a survey in one of these projects, which is called Novice, a couple of years ago, which stated that 64% of building owners in the tertiary sector, which responded to the survey, have already energy monitoring systems, meaning that they produce data for their building. But 43% of these respondents see confidentiality and security issues when sharing the data. So clearly the third aspect in that sense is providing a data flow environment which is safe and secure and easy and to a certain extent automatic for the users, so that they know where the data is stored, potentially also who is using the data, or at least what are the rules of usage and accessibility of this data, and a usage and data flow without a hurdle, meaning that it's easy and automatic and they just have to press the button to be able to feed in their data. So please highlight if I forgot to answer some of the aspects. If I may mention one more thing, all this information which is then provided at the different data hubs, data nodes which are available in the future, being it the BSO, being it the BuiltHub data space, the crucial thing is that the data is available and gives the building owners and service providers an added value in terms of having a clear focus on what is needed in order to increase the energy efficiency of the building stock and do some specific investments, because our goal is clearly to increase the investments in the building sector energy efficiency. So thank you. At this point, this is all from my side.
Great, this is a lot to unpack for sure, and I would also encourage again the audience and maybe also our other panelists here to feel free to ask questions directly to you on this matter. One question that I have in the meantime is when you basically look at this multi-level perspective that we have represented here now from the three panelists that we've heard of, Maria, Roel, and you, Daniela. Are we moving collectively in Europe with the data, with the work that we do towards a multi-level architecture where you have more separated platform depending on whether you look at the city level, the region level, the European level, member state level, and so on? Or are we moving really to an integrated, let's say vertically integrated perspective where data flows more freely between these kind of levels and platforms as well?
Well, it's clear from the European perspective that the European strategy for data, which was published in 2020, is looking for European data space where the data can flow freely. But that doesn't mean that the data has to be stored in one spot. The important aspect is that it's interoperable, as I said before, so that data can be extracted from one platform used for a different purpose, and that also data from different sectors are being able to be compared. So mobility data with energy data with financial data, all those things. And therefore, I do see that currently there are a lot of initiatives ongoing on the bottom level where different actors collect data, process data, analyze data. But I don't think that, and this is my personal view, so that's not a commission-wide perspective, if I'm allowed to say that. I don't think that it's crucial or necessary that it has to be a single point or very few points of data collection and data accessibility. It can also be spread across the continent as long as this interoperability and accessibility is guaranteed.
Fantastic, great. And this is a super good segue, I believe, into Andrew's participation in the panel. We've heard interoperability popping up really through all of the presentations as one of the key issues that we have. And my basic question to you is standardization the answer to that? Is that the one thing that we need to do to achieve interoperability for data that all of the other panelists are calling for?
Thanks, Roman. It's one of the things we need to do. I know that the rest of the panel have made some very important points about the incentives for sharing data. And I think, as Daniela just said, I think we'll always be living in a world where we have, as I like to say it, islands of data that we need to connect at whatever level of aggregation those islands will be. We'll never have this sort of utopian, if it would ever be utopian, single source of the truth in one repository. We'll always be looking to link data sets together, both within the built environment and other data sets that we want to complement when we look at those aggregate pictures. So standardization is part of the solution, but some of the deeper problems, I think, as I think Maria made point, are the incentives, the disincentives. I think it's fair to say that in many parts of the built environment, there hasn't been for many years a culture of data collection, a culture of recording data in a structured way. We still deal with either, I think as Roel mentioned, huge gaps in data and indeed data that exists as documents, not structured data. So there's a long way to go to get data available at the scale we would like. We clearly have to extrapolate, model, as Roel said, use data that we do have and use those to generate models. I think where standardization can help, and one of the dangers, unfortunately, at the moment is, as the joke goes, that the great thing about standards is there are so many to choose from, is we do need some sense of consolidation, where what data standards can help us do is not force people to rewrite their own systems, but to have that ability to share data across barriers. And I think what standardization can do is a number of things. It can at one level simply get us to agree to call the same things by the same name. So at least if we begin to share quite basic data like floor area or performance data, or even agreeing about property identifiers to make sure we know where the properties are and we can link them to geospatial information. So some of it can be as fundamental as making sure we have common understandings of addresses and locations and floor areas, the type of floor area. And I think also importantly, and once again, I'm standing on the shoulders of the other members of the panel who've mentioned this critical piece around the metadata. Whose data is it? How can it be shared? What are the privacy issues? How is it collected? How recently was it collected? What kind of calculation methodology was used if we need to make any adjustments? So in many respects, it's almost the data around the data that's as important to embed in a data standard. And I think it's the realization that the data standards that are emerging need to become effectively a way of allowing that interoperability, recognizing that there are dozens and dozens of proprietary systems, in-house systems that already have data sets, government agencies that have data that are never going to be rewritten to match a particular standard, that we're always looking about mapping data from one system to the next. But hopefully if we can establish with things like the IBPDI initiative, which we're supporting, that we can have as fewer standards as possible that can be those interoperable standards, how we can agree what we call things, exchange that data, but critically protect those privacy issues, protect those issues of understanding quality and provenance of data, and overcome some of those behavioral barriers, which I think are they're bigger than the technical ones. There are many clever people who can write all these bits of code to map the data back and forth, to do things like federated learning, where we can perhaps work on data while it's still within a market participant's data store without in any way putting that into the open market. So there are very rich set of technical solutions here, but I think the bigger problem are almost the cultural problems of what's in it for me, why should I share? In a previous life, I worked in a very different industry where competitors actually had discovered that there were huge benefits to pooling their data because it gave them a full picture of the marketplace rather than their few percentage points view of the data. And with a sector like the built environment that's so fragmented, nobody really has a full view of the market. They're kidding themselves, to use the vernacular, if they think they have this view of the market, when really it is better to add that information together. But I think, as Maria said, there are so many either real or perceived disincentives to sharing that's almost the biggest barrier before we then look at the relatively simple technical issues of getting agreement about some smaller sets of standards to use in an interoperable way.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, this was almost like a walking through the entire discussion as we have Ulrich at the beginning, so that's fantastic. Just on standards while we added, and I may say in the meantime, I think we're going to pull up a poll, I've been told, for the audience in order to pull you into the discussion about the challenges that we're facing within this space. But just quickly on standards and standard implementation, you were saying, Andrew, if I understood you correctly, that you're basically not looking for, say, a standardization of the data sets that are already there, because that would be a humongous task to rewrite them. You also not say, we also haven't heard you say basically that you think that there should be a coagulation of data platforms as much, but actually a reduction maybe of the amount of data standards and a bit more coherence around them, to say less standards and more agreement around those. So from your experience, like, what are some of the main standards that you would support? I know you mentioned one of them that you were implementing directly. What does this smaller group of standards look like? And how does it work to then go ahead with your organization experience of like promoting and implementing standards? So with colleagues and people around you, what are some of the challenges once you have that standard to then say, let's now stick to this, and what do we do with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge can be, I mean, if I think of something like IBPDI, that particular initiative, what it's aiming to do is build a high level standard in some respects that's pulling in as many other standards as possible to recognize that, for example, if we look at the kind of construction phase with standards like IFC, looking at the geometry and the components within a new build, that we reference those, and similarly with energy standards like CREM, for example. So it's making sure that perhaps what we end up with is a standard that looks at the broad number of data items we need to record on real estate, because that's one of the challenges, is that there's such a huge data set that one needs to look at, arguably, for both commercial and residential real estate, that you need a fairly big standard that does incorporate all those particular pieces. And it also links into the geospatial standards that are already out there as well. So I think it's a case of almost trying to take the best of breed of what we also already have out there, looking at certain parts of the property piece and say, actually, let's build the best of those existing standards into a super standard that pulls those together. And I think, in terms of barriers, I think it is people having to invest time and money. This is a resource issue, and it comes back to, for various participants, what is in it for them. I think Roel mentioned the attraction for certain participants in the market where they can see a quite clear commercial outcome in understanding trends and understanding what the size of a market might be. So I think it's important that the data standards do reflect useful information. And I guess it's worth understanding that difference between data and information. The raw data should be seen perhaps as less valuable, and where the value should be perceived is in people doing analytics to use that raw data. And perhaps one of the solutions with standardization and making data flow more freely is people understanding that the base data isn't so valuable. What people should place value on is the analytics that's done on top of that, the aggregation, where people can add that real value by looking at a lot of raw data and making it valuable for different stakeholders. But once again, I think we have to reassure participants that we can control the governance of this data, and then we have to make a clear business case that it is worth sharing this data. And I think on a positive point, that the whole ESG agenda, I think, will drive more openness, particularly in commercial real estate. And so standardization, I think, will become something that participants will simply have to do, because they will need to report, they will need to understand that with the challenges of obsolescence in commercial real estate, they will need to standardize and understand, particularly if they have international portfolios, they'll need to get a standardized way of looking at their assets to understand performance, understand risks of obsolescence, and make sure they do have a better data set that is of higher quality.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, this is a very good prompt, I think, for what we have in the poll right now. So basically, the question we asked there was from the audience to name the biggest challenge for you with respect to building stock data. And I'm just going to pick out the two most frequent selections here. 71% of our audience said that it's too fragmented, so data sets are too fragmented, or data in general. And then data set comparability. I mean, this is probably nothing new if you listen to the panel all morning and paid attention. But maybe we can dig a bit deeper into this with the panelists. And I would open the floor to any of you who feels like reacting on it to some extent. What is it very practically in terms of steps that we can do to address either one of those 2 points, if we need to single it out to some extent?
Well, perhaps I could just quickly answer the two fragmented points and then leave my peers to respond. I think we have to recognize that fragmentation is a fundamental characteristic of the real estate world. We have so many participants, either as owners, occupiers, supply chains, property managers, that fragmentation, I think, is with us. And in some respects, the very positive boom within the whole kind of prop tech sector means that we will have that fragmentation of systems. And that's where standardization is key. We have to recognize we will be dealing with these islands of data from different participants. And the challenge then is to standardize, have that interoperability, that governance, to make sure that people are comfortable and able to share data, because we will have these islands of data for the foreseeable future.
That's great, fantastic. I'm wondering, Ulrich, if you have maybe a view on this, now that we've heard also from all the other participants here. And obviously, I mean, this is these questions in the polls were something that I believe echo very much what you've described as barriers earlier on. So what's your take on data fragmentation and the other point
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Andrew that the fragmentation can also be seen as a fruitful market and a very diverse market. We have all these actors which can work together, so that's by itself not negative at all, in my opinion. What is important is that they can work together in the best way. And so what we want to do is of course pick up all your suggestions and then bring them to the common framework to promote and I mean present through BuiltHub. And once you have, I mean, the standardization is one point, but also these agreements. So what I would like to underline is what I think is a crucial step as well is these legal barriers you might have, or this you need to build trust. So it's not just a legal aspect; it's also a legal aspect where you make sure that you have a solid legal basis. But apart from that, you also need trust in the partners, and you can gain trust by knowing that yes, they follow a strong standard, but also that they have the right, I mean, ethics or culture in. So probably you need a portfolio of demonstrated best practices and I would say good behavior, so that other stakeholders can trust you. So if we think about the building sector, it already starts with financing options. How much do you trust that you are not just asked for more money because there's a subsidy behind, and then everything becomes just more expensive because there are subsidies, and that the subsidies miss their purpose? Or are you sure that who then performs, for example, an energy refurbishment, can you trust? And I think data can very much help. So if you have a solid database and all these actors can use the same database, then it gets much cheaper. But you can also get profit out by selling these data under certain terms. And then if you do that, the building owner, for example, if the building owner is holder of the data, must be sure that the data is not sold or misused. So I think these legal and trust dimensions come in as well.
Great. Any other reactions? I'm going to start opening up the floor a little bit more and leave the conversation also to steer to you. We have one question to Andrew as well in the chat, which is from Nicholas Dodd, which is, have you had any dialogue with mortgage lenders in the development of the energy performance data standards? It's a very specific one. I don't know if you want to take it now, if you need a minute.
No, I'm happy to say that. I mean, I've certainly had a specific involvement in the UK market. My role is global, but speaking about experience in the UK market, and certainly there's an initiative in that market looking at particularly channeling commercial mortgage finance to the residential market for retrofit. And there the lenders are part of a working group that I chair, that they're very, very keen to understand how they can use data both to validate the kind of retrofit projects that are appropriate for where they make lending decisions, and critically also understand the outcomes of those retrofit projects. So not just identifying and making sure that they lend appropriately in the first instance, but then understanding really how they can assess the impact of those retrofit, either in terms of energy savings or addressing fuel poverty or other kind of outputs. So they are very keen to get involved. They clearly, from a reporting perspective, have to report back to their supervisory financial regulators around the resilience and fitness of purpose of the portfolio that they've lent against. So that's a long way of saying, yes, a lot of interaction in the UK market, looking at that link between producing finance or providing finance, and indeed how that can be managed and reported on.
Great. With that, maybe I have one open question, try and play devil's advocate a little bit. It sounds to me that there's a lot of agreement that it's difficult to work with stakeholders to get them to support data initiatives, to adhere to standards. There's different incentives to share or not share data, and then to adopt standards and decide even on which one to adopt. Doesn't that mean that like maybe one of the easier ways to go forward with it will be to impose standards or impose regulation that enforces coherence to some extent a little bit more? Is this what we're asking for? Is that something that wouldn't make our lives easier as well? Daniela.
If I may, I would say it's a twofold approach. On the one hand, there is the regulation development ongoing in terms of defining how data should be shared and which data should be shared. But on the other hand, I think it's just a matter of time until there are enough services on the market where the data owners then see that the sharing of their data has also an economic benefit for them. If you now consider building owners of existing buildings which need to undergo a renovation, for example. So sharing the existing or the current energy consumption data, for example, in order to get a more advanced service in terms of renovation measures could be a big incentive for the data owners. And as soon as this is taken up from the market in a bigger to bigger extent, there will also be more motivation from the side of the data owners to share their data. So summary, it's a twofold, I would say.
But isn't it a challenge with split incentives to basically say, if I have an interesting data set, I have little incentive to share mine, while as I would probably agree that it would be helpful for me to see what others have in a way. And are we then talking about basically some kind of marketplace or trade system where we say, okay, yes, you can see others' data if you also contribute? Or is it really that we're hoping that people will see the lights basically and say, I'll put mine out first as open data and then see what comes back if everyone does the same?
I wouldn't think that there is a hesitancy, because the benchmarking is crucial in order to make informed decisions. And therefore, to get that benchmarking, it's crucial to provide also a large amount of data. In that sense, I would say for all those participants or stakeholders on the market which could benefit from this benchmarking, they would rather be keen in sharing their data.
Great. Any other reactions? I feel like we're due for a coffee break at this time of the day already. But I feel like there were a couple of points that we might have not addressed yet. So when it comes to cost and benefits, for example, and the business models around sharing data that Ulrich, you mentioned early on, is there something there that we can work with and leverage potentially for this discussion to basically see if there's some, are there business models for sharing data where you say you can overcome some of these different interests in sharing or not sharing?
Yeah, I think what Daniela mentioned is my take on this, and then of course to be understood if that's a common understanding or a common agreement on that, or how stakeholders see this. I think a free market where you can provide your service and is very valuable with few regulations, but it keeps a certain freedom so that you have that you can establish a multitude of solutions. And then you come to the point where you have so many that you need some sort of standardization. You need to come to converge again. And what typically happens is that first you have maybe many services, and then some of these are better, and then they become bigger and bigger and multinational, and then it becomes a service that every one of us uses every day, and because we are convinced of the added value. But to allow market players to provide services on top of data, and the willingness to share data then becomes, if I can show that I have an interesting service and that there's an added value, I would refer to Maria's example of the dashboards. So, and I think there are lots of these services already around, services where companies say, give me your data and I will analyze it and then show you what energy savings you could obtain by improving the operation of your building, for example. And if that's convincing, then you will go with them. On the other hand, and they would be keen, of course, to show that they are performing well. And if they publish the data, it could become even more credible. Of course, you need to publish it in a suitable, aggregated way, that you don't run into confidentiality issues. But by just stating I'm able to save to provide you savings of 30%, okay, I can believe that or not. But if I can credibly demonstrate that this was the case, that would maybe bring people to use this service more often.
Excellent. Andrew, you have a comment to that?
Yes, it was actually to wind back slightly. I think one of the questions was around, enforcing standards or sort of government or EU level activity. I think one area where governments can help is actually not so much enforcing standards necessarily, although certainly they should be encouraged and that they should show a leadership role here in terms of encouraging consolidation around standards. But I think more importantly, it's around where they can, opening up their data sets, making sure that the data sets that governments have at every level are made as open as possible, still with all those caveats we've discussed of governance and ethics and privacy. But I think, governments can do a lot more in terms of tidying up, if I can use that vernacular phrase, the data sets they have, attaching the correct IDs to make those data sets able to be connected and make them more widely available. So I think we're within those constraints. Governments have a big role because so much real estate data is effectively managed and curated by government agencies at different levels, that they themselves, I think, have a big role in supporting standardization, interoperability, and availability of data themselves to encourage the market.
Great, thank you. Maria?
Yeah, actually, I'll comment to what Ulrich said about if you have someone to give them your data and they analyze it, that something that you should really think about is the next time you buy a system or buy a service that is related with data. Maybe you want someone to collect data and give you an analysis. Make sure that in the contracts it's clearly stated that you own the data, that you should receive the data in a machine readable format, include the metadata, and that is yours to do whatever you want to, because I think that's quite common. You think you own the data, but you can't get it. And if you get the data, you get 1, 2, 3. Okay, but what does that mean? Didn't ask for metadata, here's the data. So that's also very important to think about.
That's great. That speaks to this legitimacy and access point that Ulrich made in his presentation, I believe, as well. Daniela, you had a comment in the chat. I'm wondering if you wanted to repeat it publicly for everyone here.
Yes, I'm happy to do so. So I was just referring to what Andrew said before on public data availability. So there is the Open Data Directive from 2019, which states that public data should be open by design and by default. And this feeds into exactly what Andrew has said before.
Great, fantastic. Wondering if there's questions or comments from the audience here. I know that you've been very comfortably sitting back with the cameras off so far, but is there anyone who has been listening to all of this and feels like we've been missing points that we haven't addressed that you would like to see? getting ready here for a bit of awkward silence, but I think we'll all jointly bear that and see if anyone wants to come forward. Andrew caved. Andrew needs to say something.
I thought perhaps I could perhaps start an interesting debate amongst ourselves and the listeners on the basis that we use the word ownership about data a lot, and I wonder whether we need to reframe that about the right you have over a certain piece of data. It's interesting that in many instances you find that perhaps as a residential occupier you clearly have energy bills, and then you discover that you don't seem to own the data about your energy bills in the sense that you can share it in the way you think you would. And I think it's perhaps interesting for us to move on from the concept of ownership to the rights you have over a certain piece of data. That data may end up in a certain market participant's hands, as it were, but do they really own it? Whose data really is it? And is it more about understanding the limits on use, the appropriate use of a piece of data, rather than people feeling that they have a copyright over the size of your house in terms of the measurement of it? So I think there's perhaps an interesting debate here for the whole sector to understand what we mean about data ownership, and perhaps move that on into a sense of understanding the curation and the rights and responsibilities of data that probably should be more open and might be owned by an individual at one point, but then has to transfer to another individual. So you think about a building passport and a residential property, that data really is owned by the asset and should pass to the new asset owner when that house is sold. And indeed, during the occupancy, different people might have rights to certain parts of that data to do certain things with it, rather than this sort of monolithic sense of owning a piece of data. So just a thought experiment about thinking about what we mean by data and the phrase ownership.
Excellent. Any views on that from our panelists here from the audience? Well, I'm wondering if there's any leverage that we have over that. I mean, obviously, like, legislation is probably quite fragmented as well in that regards, if you even know what your legislation is regarding to rights. But do you have any experiences where you'd say, like, this is something very obvious that people could be doing when it comes to that piece, like inform yourself first when you go for that sort of stuff?
I mean, I think one example, Roman, is the whole concept of kind of green leases and rental agreements, and getting more clarity around how data can flow between that particular use case of an asset owner and an occupier. So I think there are ways where we can begin to explore that whole governance piece of the use of data, and moving beyond this sense of owning data to sharing it and understanding how it can be used and who it can be shared with.
Ulrich.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think transparency or the trust again is the starting point. So usually it's not clear at all who holds the data, how it is transferred, how it is going to be used, etc. So while I mean, in my work as researcher, I'm of course in dealing with these aspects, maybe not every day, but constantly, and therefore you also learn. It's also a matter of being trained and learning how to do this, and you can make many mistakes to learn how to inform people, how to build trust, how to be very transparent on the data and the services you are use that analyze the data. There are really lots of aspects, and in the end you need experts advising and training and focusing on this to help out. And so this is, I think, pretty much missing when you deal, for example, with energy bills. So although there are efforts to make them easier to understand and so on, I think they are still in many cases very complicated, and it's not clear what the utility is then going to do with these profiles. I mean, it's quite clear that they will use profiles from their users, as that's I mean also their business. They have to do this, but it's not so clear how they do this, and I think an owner doesn't typically know. Or another example is the energy performance certificates. Again, I completely agree that it's an asset of the building, not so much the building owner. Indeed, it has to be passed to the tenant or to a renter. It has to be passed to the new property owner when the ownership changes. And so that's kind of a nice example of where data flows. But then how this is going to be used by other actors, that again might not be known by the building owner. So my first idea is to be as transparent, or to work on more transparency, and to raise the awareness and to allow people to be trained on how to do this, both the companies and but also public bodies, as well as the client.
Great, thanks for the comment. I'm looking at the time, and we still have quite a bit of time left over, but I'm feeling that we already lose a couple of people to the chat. So my suggestion would be that we maybe wrap it up a little bit earlier today, maybe another 15 minutes or so. I see there's one more question from Alexander. And my suggestion would be that we answer that question and then potentially go for one round of kind of closing words from each of our speakers. And we have a bit of an exit poll, I think, as well from you, from the colleagues here that is prepared. So I think the best thing to do here, Alexander, is if I just give you the word, if that's possible, if you could unmute yourself and describe your comment in words for us. Can I ask you to do that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. Thank you. First of all, thank you for a very interesting webinar and quite some insightful discussions and points going quite broader to what I expected. Similarly, Andrew's point about the aspects of data ownership brought this issue to my mind. Earlier, there was I had this question for Roel, who answered about how certain data that can be considered personal, the fact that they can be considered personal influences how that data can be used, and this is perfectly reasonable in the sense of talking about personal data. So similarly, in respect to the aspect of data ownership, I would assume that when we have data that can be considered personal in some manner, for example, it can be used to trace the activities of somebody in their house, to their energy consumption, to get an example from real energy consumption monitoring, then by definition, that data is linked to certain data subjects, to the owners or the occupants of the house, etc. So in that respect, I would assume that when we have to do with that data, those data subjects have to be somehow have to have a say in how their data is used. So my question, or if you want I am wondering whether this is something that indeed happens, or it's data that simply either is used at a statistical level, at an aggregate level, so that it can't be traced back to the specific persons. And so we, on the one hand, we don't have that issue, but on the other hand, we lose a lot of the granularity that might have been useful. So if this is what usually happens, or if in practice it simply is, I don't know what, locked, let's say, and out of bounds, so that there is no breach, and then in practice again we lose a lot of the insights that we could have got had we analyzed that data better. So just wondering about this.
Great. If you have any takers from the panel to react on that.
Yeah, happy, Roman, just to respond. I think that's a point that's very well made, and I think it highlights both kind of permissions around fundamentally what data can be shared and used, but also the nuance, the subtlety of what level of aggregation or synthesis might be used so that we can still get benefit from that data, but not expose in that very good example the day-to-day activities of a household based on their energy usage. So it does perhaps highlight the subtle nature of how we need to think about data ownership, the use of data, and the level of granularity that data can be used at, or indeed whether it can be turned into a synthetic piece of data, or whether from a technical perspective we use approaches like I mentioned, like federated learning, where you can still look at that data, but look at it at the edge, as it were, and therefore once again not expose that personal information. I guess the other big challenge, of course, is that so much of this data is more around commercial sensitivity, which is not covered by GDPR. So we always tend to look at GDPR as the solution for these problems, when so much of this data is more commercially sensitive, arguably, in terms of the participants. So I think we need to look at the personal issues in terms of data, but also these broader data issues around commercial sensitivity, which puts off so many commercial participants from sharing their data.
Great comment. Does that answer your question, Alexander?
Yes, definitely. And as I said, it's not so much of a very specific question, if you want, but rather a more general query on what happens in such cases. I imagine there are also different approaches from country to country, from even from utility to utility. One might work in a more traditional way, and they are only interested, let's say, in the peaks, in looking at trying to foresee potential peaks in electricity demand so that they can prepare for them. And others might be, have a much more granularized perspective, looking at areas and behaviors, etc. And of course, there's a lot of research that could happen around that data as well, outside the utilities. So
Great.
I mean, others might have a different perspective, for example, and say, "Oh, okay, we don't touch that," for example, or But thank you very much.
Thanks for bringing that aspect into the discussion. It's surely very interesting. Excuse me. With that said, I think we're probably ready for a closing round. I saw that some people left already, and that shouldn't end the conversation here. We have a couple of other webinars coming up. This is just the first one in the series, and we're obviously very happy to see you all back for the next one. With that said, maybe I can hand the talking stick to Roel for some final takeaways for that, and then we will do a bit of a tour de table before we close the webinar for today. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Yes, I was a bit triggered by the results of the poll, especially on the topic of the data comparability and the lack of analyzing tools. And I remembered a couple of years ago in the EU Building Stock Observatory, there was an indicator for deep renovation. And yeah, that's very useful to compare your own evolution with what's happening in other EU member states. And then we noticed that, for example, in one country, they had a reasonably high deep renovation rate. And when we looked into it, then we noticed that yeah, the definition of these data or these indicators was very different in all the countries. So basically, I would like to suggest that if data would have been comparable in the different member states, then it's very crucial that the definitions are set in a very clear way. For example, in one country, the definition of a deep renovation was not only one single renovation of one house linked to a building permit, like we used to do it in our region, but that country used the combination of single renovation measures. And for instance, if 3 different houses would be renovated in only one topic, then they would just add it up, and that would count for 1 deep renovation. So, and that was on top of the single deep renovation. So if the countries have different definitions on topics that would be put in a database, then the comparability is 0. So that's an important thing, I think, on the European level.
Great, thank you for those thoughts. Daniela, do you have any takeaways from the session today? Anything you want to emphasize?
What I take with me from this morning is clearly the relevance of the standardization approach, and also how it is implemented on the market. As Andrew pointed out, that it makes more sense to give few standards to the stakeholders and market actors rather than having a whole lot of choice, and then already losing a bit of the standardization aspect. The other thing is I'm curious to see how this interoperability of the different platforms will be implemented, and to see a broader and faster uptake of the usage of this data. I think it's not too long that we will see a clear outcome of that efforts we are having here now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that. Maria, for your takeaways for the session.
Okay. I just want to encourage you to share all the data you can share, and put some love and effort into the metadata, and look if there are standards out there, so you don't invent your own standard. I think that's really important.
That's great. Andrew, do you have anything besides standards? That one is already talking about.
I think people have covered the salient points. I think what we should remain optimistic that the direction of travel here is towards standardization, towards the market understanding the value of sharing data. There are clearly barriers, but I think if the spirit is there from all the various participants, government, private sector, I think we can get there, but it is going to be a huge challenge. But I think what's so positive with initiatives like yours is that there's clearly so many market participants heading in the right direction, but it is a lot of behavioral change as much as the technical stuff.
Great, thank you. And I think while we hand the talking stick to Ulrich, there's one final poll that we want to do about how you found the webinar today. So this is something that we ask you to fill out in the meantime to the remaining audience that we have here. And with that said, the poll should be online right now. Please answer it before we close the webinar. And last word goes to you, Ulrich.
Yeah, thank you, Roman. So, well, of course, I see BuiltHub as a vehicle mainly of transporting and translating and promoting and communicating all these salient points we discussed today. As a takeaway for me is that, well, first of all, I find quite confirmed that we are going in the same direction together, with some, of course, variances on specific views. But there is a general trend which is very clear on what needs to be done. And also the importance of, well, some of the points have been highlighted much more than others. So, well, standardization, comparability, data quality, being able to generate trust and to solve hurdles like as ownership and also the importance of commercial data, the right aggregation level of data such that data can be shared. I think these are for me important takeaways.
Thanks a lot for that. And thank you also to the audience for sticking with us this morning and for giving us generally favorable reviews for this first webinar. We very much welcome you back for the next round, and we'll get in touch with you on when and where that happens and on which topic. And with that, I thank you all very much and wish you a fantastic rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everyone.
Have a nice day.
Cheers all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.